Thank you for tuning in, everybody. This is Wire Wrap College, and this is one of the first lessons that I'm going to be having on my YouTube page. Thank you guys all for filtering over from my Instagram, Amorpheus Wire Wraps. I really appreciate all of my followers. You guys mean the world to me. And at the beginning of this video, we're going to be showing you how to start your channel setting. But first, we're going to show you the supplies that you're going to need for it. For my channel settings, I use a specific gauge of wire, and I usually almost never change it up unless I'm like at the very bare minimum of wire. But the wires I chose today to show you guys, I cut 5 square wires. These are 21 gauge square wires, and the square shows one face on each side. And I always make sure that if I'm using 21 gauge, that it's half hard. I like my channel settings to be sturdy, and I don't want them to be able to be bent easily, and I want them to be just able to be passed on a generation. So I always use half hard. And so I have 5 square wires, and then here I have 4 21 gauge half round wires. The half round wires are what I'm going to be using to hold the stone, and these go on top of these square wires. So I have 4 of these, 5 of the square wires, and then along the side here, I usually cut a nice little spool of extra wire that's 21 gauge as well. So there'll be 5 of these wires, but you want one to be extra long to weave around the entire channel setting. I also do back here have 4mm cabochons. They're very small. One side's flat, one side's round, which is what a cabochon is. I usually use these for the settings. I never use anything bigger than 4. I use 3 or 4mm max for this setting, so you'll see how they go in there momentarily. This tool here, I want to make sure that everyone knows to use a clamp. This is a wooden ring clamp, and one end has leather, so if you put your wires inside of here and you clamp them down by tightening this little knob here, it won't damage your wires. People use a lot of hardware stores and Harbor Freight, and they get a lot of plastic or metal clamps that like ruin and tarnish your wire. You never really want to use that. These are like $4 to $6 on riogrande.com, and I highly recommend them. Or Parawire, you can buy them, or Etsy, or pretty much anywhere for any like online arts and crafts. So definitely want to recommend these, and this is what all my wires go into, right into there, and then I tie them together with this little knob. I'll show you that in a second. So first things first, I basically just open this up just so there's a little bit of a gap. And this part I do say is a little bit tricky. I always make sure all of my wire ends are all even at the bottom. And then you're going to want to kind of even out the wires so they create a flat, even surface. And then the part that can be tricky is you're now going to take the 4 half round wires and put them on top of these 5. So they're going to be perfectly parallel going up and down. And then you want to make sure that all of these are also flat on the bottom and round on the top. If you don't have these all flat on the bottom and round on the top, this weave will mess you up. Just giving you a fair warning. Alright, so basically the next step is take these 4 that I straightened out and put them on top of this, and I usually put them perpendicular to each other and lift my fingers up, and I put it down on top of those wires. So you want to get a good grip on holding them so nothing can fall. And then you want to slightly turn at an angle. And then these I usually take and I bend up so they kind of have like a little curvature, just so they don't get caught and in your way. And now I take my back fingers here, hold these wires, and I'll turn slowly so all the wires are perfectly on top of each other, completely vertical. Let's see if you can see that. And once these wires are all held together, I basically take them and hold them as tight as I can. This part can hurt your fingers a little bit, so just be careful. And then I put them sideways through. And then I use my other hand to slowly tighten this little nut. You never want to let go of your right hand here. because that will let go of all the wires and they'll spring open. So now that I have these through, I usually transfer this without letting go to my other hand. See how they're all perfectly aligned? I usually try to make sure that they're centered as much as I can on top of the square wires. Otherwise, they can fall off the sides and you never want that. And now that I have these held here, I'm gonna grab the half round wire and feed it through momentarily. Alrighty, so for the next step, I'm gonna grab my 21 gauge half round wire and make sure the bottom goes across this. You don't want this to be upside down, otherwise your gems won't stay in. And I feed this wire through the very tip, going across the 5 and 4 wires. And then while holding it tightly, I will switch fingers to my other hand and I rotate around as tight as I can. And now all of those wires are held together in a little burrito. And then I usually wrap this 9 times. So just hold slowly and keep rotating your left hand and it'll just easily rotate all the way up. And let me get a zoom in on this. Once these wires are all the way down, I usually always take a pair of pliers and I will flatten them. So every time I get a couple wires here, I'll go around, a soft squeeze, and I always push down. I'll go to the end and push the wires down. And if you don't do that, it leaves gaps in your wire and you always want to have a flush channel setting. So make sure you're doing that every 7 to 10 weaves or so. All right. Here we are. And then I bring it under, and this is the step where I start to add my weaves. So there are 4 wires you have on the very top here. You're going to end up pulling those up, and I'm going to show you that right now. Alrighty, so for the next step, I'm going to show you that you basically just take your ends that I made you curve up, all 4 of these half round wires, and you want to just take those, pull them up, like this. And once you pull them straight up, you want to have them at a 90-degree angle. And make sure that they're all perfectly flush. And you're going to take this half round wire that you started and bring it around. And you're going to do 6 rotations. I always do things in 3s, 6s, and 9s, so usually most of my weaves underneath the gem, there's about 6. All 4mm gems usually require about 6 rotations underneath to have enough space that they don't get messed up or fling out or get cracked or anything. So right there you'll see I made a perfect seat, and right there on that seat you're going to want to take one of your 4mm gems and you basically just put it right on that seat. And you see a little perfect little seat you made? It may have fallen off, but I'll show you exactly how to put it on here momentarily. Check it out. So whenever I'm putting my fingers around the gem, this always keeps the stone in place from falling left or right. And I usually have my fingers always around a gem every time I'm setting a new gem in its place. So I basically will pull these wires over the top of that gem, and I'll make sure that it slowly goes over without my gem flinging out. You want to have your fingers around the gem to grip it while doing this step. And I usually push down like an inch ahead of the gem. And you can see that I'm trapping it between the bottom and the top. Once it's trapped like that, I usually take a pair of pliers and down, usually about like a ½ inch up, just lightly squeeze down, and then I squeeze closer, and each time I squeeze closer to it, it gets right up next to the gem. And then I squeeze at the bottom of the gem a little bit to make it open, back at the top of the gem, and now you'll see that the gem is peeking through like a little eyeball. This is exactly what you're going to want. You don't want it to be flimsy, one-sided. You want to always make sure that these wires are opened up. And if it opens up weird, you can usually lightly take your pliers and move it, but I got mine to work pretty well. So once I have this little gem here with the wires over the top, I go once again with this weaving wire and I pull it around only 2 times. The 2 times will give it a flush, unique look. You can do 3 or 4, but this is the way I always make all of my rings, and a lot of people ask me how many rotations I do. I only do 2. So what I just did here is I usually squeeze down on those 2 wires to make sure that they're flush down, and then you'll see that that gem is perfectly trapped in there. And after you squeeze on them, you want to push down to keep those weaves perfectly tight, secure, and looking flush for the next weave. Then I usually squeeze the bottom of the gem lightly, and it opens up the eyeball. Then I squeeze the top of it, and I do that until it's perfectly centered. And you just set your first gem. And if you're going to set more than 1, you pull these wires right back up. Let's get that into focus. I apologize. You pull these wires right back up, and then you start again with another set of 6. Alrighty. So for the second part, I'm basically just going to add an opal and then a ruby after that to make a ruby opal ruby pattern. But I'm not going to speak much. I'm just going to let you guys watch the flow and see how it works out. Rotations around, squeeze, push down, squeeze down lightly, squeeze down lightly, and don't be afraid to adjust here and there if something gets out of line or just gets a little bit too wide. Always readjust. Just constantly readjusting makes everything look the best it can. Pull up, add 6 rotations. Once I get those 6, I squeeze down again, making yet another seed, and then we will add 1 more of these rubies. By the way, these rubies are UV reactive, so they will glow. So this entire weave should glow underneath blacklight, since the opal is also a silica, which does react. Rotations, squeeze, push down, 1 more squeeze, and basically that is the entire weave. Right there you just set 3 separate stones. Both of these are ruby, this is an opal, and it's also UV reactive, and I'll turn this light off and show you guys how that looks. It's crazy. So once you get a hold of this channel setting, keep practicing it over and over, and eventually you'll figure out that you can add this to bales, you can add this to rings, and I will actually be showing you in a future tutorial how to add this band into a ring and how to make different kinds of ring designs on top. You can add it to the top, you can add it in different designs in different places, you can add them as bales to pendants. There's all kinds of different options you can do, and here's another different option that's kind of the same. Stay tuned for the next video.